Good evening and welcome to Tysky Sour. My apologies, we're ever so slightly late this evening, but we will make it up for you with, surprisingly, for once, a show full of good news. We are going to be talking about the end of the Donald Trump presidency that was confirmed on Saturday, and also, perhaps just as importantly, the news that a COVID-19 vaccine has been proven to be 90% effective. That means it will protect 90% of us from coronavirus. It looks like, obviously this is not completely definitive, but it looks like we could have the end of this pandemic in sight. Ash, how are you feeling? Are you feeling joyful today?
I'm always feeling joyful when I see your face, Michael.
Nothing to do with the vaccine or the end of Donald Trump?
No, I'd hoped that coronavirus would take me first, so I'm very disappointed not to be meeting oblivion. But I suppose the vaccine's good news for other people.
Those are the two big themes of our show tonight. So most of the show we're going to be talking about the meaning of Joe Biden's win, so people celebrating in the United States, what it means for the rest of the world. We should be speaking on the show to Nelini Stamp, organiser with the Working Families Party, having some slight problems with connection, but that should be coming up. And we definitely have Anand, Menon, director of a UK in a Changing Europe, talking about Biden and Brexit, and David Waring, academic and Novara media columnist, talking about Biden and empire. So we're going to have a very comprehensive account of what Biden becoming president means for America and the world, and of course, talk about all the good news about this new vaccine. As ever, you can tweet on the hashtag TyskySour and share the show link, so we've got more of you watching live. First story. As anyone who's been hooked to CNN since Tuesday will know, the world's most advanced economy took 4 days to count their general election results. But on Saturday afternoon, the major networks called Pennsylvania for Biden, and Trump officially lost the presidency. This was Biden's victory speech.
To everything there is a season, a time to build, a time to reap and a time to sow, and a time to heal. This is the time to heal in America. Now this campaign is over. What is the will of the people? What is our mandate? I believe it's this. Americans have called upon us to marshal the forces of decency, the forces of fairness, to marshal the forces of science and the forces of hope in the great battles of our time. The battle to control the virus, the battle to build prosperity, the battle to secure your family's health care, the battle to achieve racial justice and root out systemic racism in this country. And the battle to save our planet by getting climate under control. The battle to restore decency, defend democracy, and give everybody in this country a fair shot. That's all they're asking for, a fair shot. With full hearts and steady hands, with faith in America and in each other, with love of country, a thirst for justice, let us be the nation that we know we can be, a nation united, a nation strengthened, a nation healed. The United States of America, ladies and gentlemen, there's never been anything we've tried we've not been able to do. So remember, as our grandpapa used to say when I walked out of his home when I was a kid up in Scranton, he said, "Joey, keep the faith." And our grandmother, when she was alive, she yelled, "No, Joey, spread it. Spread the faith. God love you all. May God bless America, and may God protect our troops." Thank you, thank you, thank you.
So the big message there, Joe Biden wants to heal America. And what stood out to me, I suppose this is, as an outsider watching that, was how much presidential candidates, well now a president-elect, talk about one, religion, and two, militarism. At the end, God bless our troops. It would sound very odd if that was the sign-off used by anyone who'd just been elected to be Prime Minister of this country. But anyway, that's my outsider understanding, not probably the most significant thing going on in that speech. But What was nice to see over the weekend was the number of people out in America's big cities celebrating this result, celebrating the end of Donald Trump, and you can understand why. I think we can get up some of these clips now, some of the visuals of people around the United States celebrating. And this is in New York, so you can hear people cheering from their balconies, people honking their horns. All across the country, it looked like this was going, well, I say all across the country, obviously in the big cities. There are some parts of rural America who will be distraught that Donald Trump has been voted out. But for many Americans, huge relief. We can go now to what is clearly my favorite video from the celebrations. It is this reveller interrupting a French news reporter mid-flow.
And I've been to France, it's beautiful.
Il est pas le seul ce soir.
Hey, escargot. I love a croissant. I love an omelette du fromage.
Gastronomie, le petit déjeuner.
We'll go to a more serious clip in a moment. But first of all, Ash, you can be cynical, right? Whoever is American president, it's still an American empire. They're still going to be, exploiting the global south. There's still going to be racial capitalism that exists in the United States. This is by no means a solution to all of the injustices which are rooted in the political establishment in the United States. But it's nice to watch people celebrate the removal of essentially a white supremacist from the White House.
Absolutely. I think that you can be skeptical of Joe Biden's progressive credentials while also celebrate the fact that Donald Trump, someone who has got white nationalist sympathies, someone who has consistently failed to condemn and even encouraged far-right terrorists, is no longer occupying the highest office in the land. And I would say about that omelette du fromage guy, he is the single most charismatic man on the planet. That final shoulder shimmy, the power that has, the international implications that has, the strength that has, oh my God. And I think it is really wonderful to see, because this is a victory for America's young and diverse cities. You haven't had a political settlement which has reflected the opinions of where most people in the country live. And that's incredibly undemocratic. It's an undemocratic system, the American democratic system. So if I were in America, for all of my skepticism and cynicism about Joe Biden, for all of my support for Bernie Sanders, I'd be out in the street celebrating too, because it is a victory if you're Black or if you're Muslim or if you're Hispanic and you've been worried about the safety of your family, to have been able to vote this monster out of office. Now, that doesn't mean that the job ends there. If anything, it just begins. And there are specific challenges, I think, facing the left and also facing liberals who kind of think, that's done now. Don't have to do politics anymore, because Trumpism itself isn't going to go away, as well as the more embedded injustices, which we saw deepening under Obama. So I think, holding those two things at the same time, very important.
We'd show a more serious clip than the fromage guy as well. I agree, probably the most charismatic person I've seen in a Twitter video in my lifetime. This is a close second, though. Another incredibly charismatic person who's sort of speaking truth to power this time on or at one of the celebrations for the ousting of Donald Trump.
Why did you come out here tonight?
It was important to, feel the energy and be in the moment, but it's also a reminder to let them know that particularly 55% of white women voted for Donald Trump this year, whereas it's up from 2016, 53% white women. So while we're in a celebratory mood, it's important to let these people know that why we're here in the first place.
Why was it important? A lot of people out here to celebrate, they're just telling me that they wanted to be part of this event tonight. Why did you want to be here tonight in particular?
Because I was here in 2008, I was here in 2012, and I thought it was just important as a part of the democracy. I feel like as though, a lot of people are thanking these swing states for putting us in this position, but I wanted to highlight that we not only have to thank Michigan, but we need to mostly thank Detroit. We shouldn't just thank Georgia, but we should thank Atlanta. We shouldn't just thank Pennsylvania, but we need to thank Philly. Those are majority Black cities. And so it's Black people who put us in this position of a celebratory mood.
Nicole, thank you so much for talking to us. And so
That was a protester, a reveller. I don't know what you call someone who's at a celebration for the ousting of someone. It's not got a protest because they're celebrating that something's happened, but it's not just a party, right? I'm sure there's a word for this. Maybe, Ash, your vocabulary is slightly better than mine. But this was a super, I think, important intervention in kind of bringing the country down to earth, which is to say that, yes, we've ousted Donald Trump, but still the majority of white people in the United States did vote for him, vote for someone who clearly... well, it's not just that he tolerates racism, he clearly sparks it. As you say, this is someone who has been promoting white supremacy from the White House, also pointing out there, because you're seeing lots of commentary which is saying this victory was because Biden won the votes of white people in the suburbs. And yes, that's in part true. He did swing many of those voters away from Trump, or people who voted Trump in 2016. And that was significant in the tight margins in these states. But just as significant is the fact that black and brown people turned out in America's large cities. And again, you'll see this in the UK, you'll see this after elections across the Western democracies. It's those voters who almost immediately start getting taken for granted. Ash, your thoughts on this?
I mean, so this is something I've been thinking a lot about, the way in which white America is being dragged kicking and screaming towards a multiracial democracy. And when confronted with that future of people who have been deemed racially inferior participating in politics on the level of a citizen with equal rights, as a lot of white people would go, well, you know what, if it has to be a multiracial democracy, I can live without the democracy part. And are fully on board with eroding those democratic norms if it means maintaining those wages of whiteness, which in Paul Gilroy's words seem to be worth less, every year. So I think that is a ongoing tension within the heart of the American Republic. The Republicans no longer have a path to the White House, which includes winning the popular vote. The response to that has been mass-scale voter suppression, predominantly of voters of color in those key states of Georgia, Wisconsin, Michigan. So the fact that the cities of Detroit, the city of Atlanta was able to turn out in such numbers, it's in spite of the electoral process in some ways, and not because of it. So I think if the Democrats want to consolidate this electoral coalition that they have, they're really going to have to commit to overturning these voter suppression, infrastructures at the state level across the nation, because Republicans are not going to go quietly into the good night. I think that there will be a sting in the tail if Joe Biden thinks that all he has to do is come across with a message of consensus. No, that's not how you win.
Absolutely. I mean, sort of later in the show, we're going to go back to sort of the dispute between the centrists and the left wing of the Democratic Party. AOC sort of hit back at people critiquing her, but we'll park that just this moment. First of all, what I want to bring up is that, whilst these celebrations were very real, the US and the American media, in a sort of characteristically American fashion, did to some degree overstate the case, partly due to their, it seems, ignorance about foreign cultures. Let's get up this tweet from ABC News. So ABC, one of the most prominent networks in the United States, they've got fireworks lit up the night sky over London, England, after Joe Biden was characterized to be the apparent winner of the presidential election. Now, any of our British viewers will know that those fireworks were not for Joe Biden. It was fireworks night. It was Guy Fawkes night. But presumably their American correspondent was here and didn't know that. I don't know. They presumably don't speak to many people, even though they're. Who knows how that ended up going out from ABC? But anyway, ridiculous. I think we have Nalini stamped now. Do we have Nalini? Amazing. You're giving away your Wi-Fi password to our audience. Very dangerous.
That's not even the Wi-Fi password anymore.
Tell us how it feels. How does it feel to be? Actually, first of all, tell us what city you're in.
I'm in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania.
And how have the celebrations been? How are you feeling? What's the mood on the ground?
The mood on the ground is pretty great. I think that a lot of people are just trying to figure out what happens next. But the mood was joyous in a time of deep pain. I mean, Philadelphia was in the middle of an uprising here when Walter Wallace was shot and killed, actually around the corner from the Working Families Party office 2 weeks ago, the week before the election. And there was so much talk of right-wing intimidation at polling places, white supremacists, and through all of it, we actually used joy as a radical act because so many people were like, well, the left is going to do this and they're going to burn stuff down and this is going to happen and we're the right wing and we're going to intimidate. And what was really beautiful is how Philadelphia came together. I mean, we organized Joy to the Polls concerts outside of polling places across the country because we have rampant voter suppression. And we had one video that has about almost 20 million views now of a voter dancing with us going into line. And when we found out that there was a concentrated effort of right-wing folks going to the convention center earlier this week, we threw a big block party. And it was actually a radical act because so many people have been inside of their homes. We are in our second wave of COVID cases that already hit Philadelphia and the Northeast pretty hard. And so people just had a street party and we did it and we drowned out former Attorney General of the state of Florida with Beyonce when she was trying to make a case to steal the election. So it feels pretty good that being here in Philadelphia, that Philadelphia set the tone for the world and that Pennsylvania ended up winning it for Joe Biden.
And I mean, that's interesting, actually, the fact that it does seem like cities in Pennsylvania, what you're seeing is parties in the street, because there was a lot of concern that what you'd see is riots in the street. If Trump lost, people were scared that there would be, violence between his right-wing supporters and left-wing supporters of Biden, or just, I suppose, more likely just anti-Trump activists. But it doesn't actually seem like there has been that much tension. Where are all the Trump supporters? Because presumably there are a lot of people who feel very put out and they're sort of buying into the Trump line that this election is being stolen. But are they visible on the streets of Philadelphia?
Definitely there has been folks who have been out. I mean, while we were at the convention center, 2 people were arrested with AR-15s and taken out of their cars because they were potentially planning something. There was a bomb threat scare. And there were hundreds of Trump protesters, but there were hundreds more of us that were just actually trying to say count every vote. They wanted to stop the vote counting. They wanted to stop what they called the steal of the election because they are saying that mail-in voting is fraudulent. And they're still saying that to this day. There were people with guns in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. And so there are a lot of folks. Sorry, this has been a headquarters, so there'll be people moving around. There have been lots of folks who are trying to carry the white supremacist and far right wing banner, and they were just stopped and de-escalated with joy, with people saying, not in my town, not in my city, and not today, with playing music and playing like everything from old house hits to queer anthems, to Latino music, and speaking in Spanish and English. And so we saw that instead of our country being intimidated or people and our movement being intimidated, we actually used our culture, something that is really important, especially to Black and brown communities, to say, not today.
And I know I promised I'd let you go at past, because I know you're going to have loads of things on right now. So my final question to you is, what does this mean for the left and what happens next? Because I know that you, as a representative for the Working Families Party, you backed Warren, then Bernie, and then ended up, of course, campaigning for Joe Biden against Donald Trump. But, as far as I understand, Biden doesn't exactly share your politics, but you've got an election, I presume, now to fight in Georgia to try and win the Senate for the Democrats. And then you've got to try and push Joe Biden to the left. So what are going to be your priorities in the weeks and months ahead? And what should we be looking out for? What are going to be the flashpoints in terms of the left's attempt to make this Biden administration as progressive as it can be?
Absolutely. So, the blue wave didn't happen as we wanted it to, meaning down ballot. We are in a fight for the Senate right now in Georgia. Both races at the top of the ticket, the Senate, are in a runoff on January 5th. Early voting starts in a month on December 14th. And so I think that the priorities right now for the left is one is ensuring that any attempts to undermine the democratic process that happened on Tuesday, that we push back for that, because, you know, the president has a few steps to be elected. And one is the electors vote in states across the country on December 14th. So we need to make sure that that's really important. So December 14th will be a very important date for everyone as we begin early voting in Georgia and as our electors meet, because of the inadequate and undemocratic process of the Electoral College that we still have. The electors meet. There can be some sideways moves done that day to try to submit alternate elector states. State legislators can do that. So we want to keep an eye on December 14th to make sure that they support the will of the people, because the people decided. And then it is going to be on for the first 100 days. The left has been organizing together in this united front that has been unprecedented, that has been led by the Movement for Black Lives, Working Families Party, and United We Dream Action, and others, to make sure that our issues are at the front and center of the first 100 days. We need to address climate change. We need to make sure that a Green New Deal becomes a reality. We need to make sure that housing is a human right and that we end the commodification of housing in our country, because we are going to face a massive eviction crisis, at the end of December. And we need a real, full, and tried and true economic package that actually gives jobs to people, that makes sure that people are not struggling, working paycheck to paycheck no longer in this country because of the needs that the pandemic has brought up to the surface. So there's actually, you know, a lot of us have been joking about how, you know, some of us have slept for a little bit, but a lot of us have a lot of work to do to make sure that the first 100 days and the mandate is from the left that we want our jobs, that we want a Green New Deal, that we want the Breathe Act and everything that we've been fighting for the last not just 4 years, but decades as the left.
Nalini Stamp, thank you so much for your time this evening. We know it's very valuable, and all of our solidarity for the struggle going into Georgia, and then for those first 100 days trying to push Biden to the left. We will be watching closely. But for now, let's all, I think, you know, we really appreciate the joy we can sort of feel emanating from Philadelphia right now.
Thank you so much.
That's Nalini Stamp from the Working Families Party. If you're new to this show, now is the time to hit subscribe. As you know, if you're a regular viewer, Tysky Sour goes live every Monday, Wednesday and Friday at 7 p.m. And we're going to go to a couple of super chats before we go on to what the Trump campaign have been doing over the last couple of days. It's entertaining. This is kind of the Trump stories at the moment, because he's on his way out. They're kind of silly and entertaining. We don't have to worry, you know, is he going to do, well, actually, to be honest, he's still going to be the president for the next couple of months. He could set off a nuclear bomb. Let's hope he doesn't. Anyway, I'm going to go to your super chats now. That was a bit of a detour. David Collins with 20 quid. I saw Michael on Saturday in Hackney. I considered a socially distanced approach to say thanks for all you have done this year, but afraid I bottled it. Here is 20 quid instead. David Collins, next time say hi, but also, we also do really appreciate the 20 quid. I should let you know they're not mutually exclusive. Ceres Jones, $9.99. Is it worrying Trump just fired his defense secretary when he has 2 months left with his finger still on the button? Keep up your great work. That kind of actually preempted what I was saying about the nuke. I'm afraid I don't actually know enough about the context of him firing the defense secretary to know. But what I do know is that until Biden is inaugurated in January, Trump does have all the powers that come with the presidency. Very odd situation where you can have an outgoing president basically do whatever they want, knowing there are going to be no consequences because they're already on the way out. What everyone seems to be expecting is that Trump is going to sort of hand out pardons like they're candy to people in his circle who are currently having trouble with the law. In terms of how that's going to play out in terms of foreign policy, I don't know, but it's obviously very much worth keeping a close eye on. Philip James with a $5 on Biden's speech. The use of religion is odd, but he also included the trans and disability communities, which is something you wouldn't get from a UK politician. Very important, yeah. Actually, you know, I should say there were a bunch of fairly progressive points raised in that Biden speech, sort of a commitment to representing black people who he actually sort of recognized gave him the election. It didn't seem like in that speech he was taking people for granted. And then trans rights, gay rights, talked about climate change. I mean, again, we shouldn't get too carried away with what someone says in an acceptance speech, but we'll take what we can. Gefo me, Fiverr, a triumph over lies and hate. Yeah, that's a nice way of putting it. And then super chats from Tirana, Christina, and Derek. Thank you so much. They keep us going. On to Trumpland. Just as the networks were calling the race for Joe Biden, Trump's personal legal attorney was holding a press conference to explain all the allegations of fraud they were about to mount. There is still no concrete evidence, of course, but there was an entertaining moment in the press conference when Giuliani found out from a journalist that Biden had been confirmed as president-elect.
The poll? Because they don't decide the election. The call for Joe Biden isn't. Who was it called by? Oh my goodness, all the networks. Wow. All the networks. We have to forget about the law. Judges don't count. All the networks thought Biden was going to win by 10%. Gee, what happened? Come on, don't be ridiculous. Networks don't get to decide elections. Courts do.
I mean, he kind of does have a point. It is an oddity of the American system that it is when the networks call the election that people decide, oh, Biden is officially the winner. But at the same time, he's saying courts will decide. The reason the networks all agreed to call it at that period of time, including Fox News, the networks that have been massively supportive of the Republicans and Trump, is because there were sort of 10,000 margins in between Biden and Donald Trump in enough states to get him over the 270 mark. So the argument there, very weak. What was very entertaining, though, and very odd about this press conference, it wasn't just, Rudy Giuliani's sort of weak arguments and entertaining persona, I suppose, but the location of it, where it was. We can now take a look at the location. And journalists were confused because the sitting president's team were holding a press event in an industrial estate. So it was on the outskirts of Philadelphia. What you're seeing now is Sky coverage of the event.
Oral fraud. That they were uniformly deprived of their right to inspect any single part of the mail-in ballots.
It's 3 days since he first alleged fraud. Since then, he says he's found 50 witnesses, but only a handful were available to speak.
So you missed a bit of the audio at the start, but what's going on there? Rudy Giuliani has sort of lined up behind him a bunch of people who he says have witnessed fraud going on. I'm not sure how much concrete evidence any of them can provide, but again, this is going to be a case of sort of 10, 20, 100 votes here or there. It won't make any difference. But what I want to focus on now is why was the team of the sitting president giving a press conference in an industrial state on the outskirts of Philadelphia? And it appears, I mean, this is incredible, it was the result of Trump's campaign getting mixed up between the plush Four Seasons hotel in Philadelphia and a gardening center with the same name. So earlier in the day, Trump had posted a now deleted tweet about a press conference being held at the Four Seasons. People assumed, because this was the sitting president, that was going to be the famous Four Seasons hotel. We can take a look at the plush hotel here. These are from their website. Apparently the tallest building in Philadelphia, and the hotel is at the very top. All looks very beautiful. Looks like the kind of place where the presidential press team would be giving a press conference. But not all was what it seemed. So the hotel clarified on Twitter after Trump sort of tweeted that Trump tweeted that they were going to have a press conference at the Four Seasons. So then the hotel clarified on Twitter, we can get this up. To clarify, President Trump's press conference will not be held at Four Seasons Hotel, Philadelphia. It will be held at Four Seasons Total Landscaping, no relation with the hotel. Trump then backed that up to get the Trump tweet. Big press conference today in Philadelphia at Four Seasons Total Landscaping, 11:30 a.m. This is the sitting president. He's got like 60 million followers. And again, let's take another look at that press conference at Four Seasons Total Landscaping. Like really, really phenomenal. Also, I suppose to add insult to injury, the Four Seasons Total Landscaping Center is located in between Fantasy Island Adult Books and Delaware Valley Cremation Center. So if Giuliani was worried his allegations of fraud hadn't landed well with the press, he could at least go back to his boss with a fleshlight or a blow-up sex doll to try and distract him from the bad news. Ash, this is a kind of fitting, I suppose it's not quite the end of the Donald Trump presidency, but a fitting end of the Donald Trump dream.
I mean, it kind of says it all, right? That Donald Trump seems to occupy this completely bizarro world, which even, Baudrillard would have had a hard time coming up with, and just leaning into it, just following it all the way, not even trying to book a different hotel and going change a plan. It's going to be this other luxury setting. Just going, fuck it, garden center. All right, make it work, make it look like this was the plan all along. But I think one of the interesting things here is actually the career trajectory of Rudy Giuliani, because like most people, I first became aware of Rudy Giuliani when he was mayor of New York City during 9/11. And I remember him being sort of beamed around the world as a, responsible, solid, sensible right winger. And I suppose it speaks to, the degradation of the public sphere that's happened in the intervening decades, that he's now reduced to pointing and gibbering, like, all the media, in order to signal his loyalty to an increasingly volatile and bizarre millionaire with orange skin and a comb over. I mean, I think that story arc is weirdly compelling. You kind of half expect at any moment, record scratch, freeze frame. Yep, that's me. Suppose you're wondering how I got here, outside of a garden centre, sandwiched in between an erotic bookstore and a crematorium.
I really hope it was one of those situations where they'd sort of allowed a fly-on-the-wall documentary maker to accompany the campaign. You'd have thought, he's got an eye for reality TV. You'd hope he'd have some sort of, behind-the-scenes cameraman trying to fit that into some future documentary, because I would pay good money to see that.
I would sell a kidney to see that. My internal organs up on the market. That's how much I want to see it.
If you are someone sitting on that footage, I think that was an offer there. Kidneys go for a lot these days, I hear. We're going to go on to a very serious story. Before we do that, if you are not already, please do subscribe to the channel. But most importantly, as you know, Novara Media Tysky Sour only possible because of your kind support. If you already donate the equivalent of 1 hour's wage a month, thank you so much. You make this possible. We love you. If not, please do go to novaramedia.com/support and donate the equivalent of 1 hour's wage a month. Just got a super chat in here as well. Chris Jarvis with a tenner. Great show as always. I'm currently recovering from surgery and grateful for the NHS knowing the financial impact of illness in the US. What prospect is there of any real healthcare reform under Biden? Well, solidarity. I hope you recover speedily. In terms of the prospect for healthcare reform in the United States, again, this is not necessarily my area of expertise, but my understanding is that if the Republicans maintain control of the Senate, not much. I suppose if Joe Biden can put forward the kind of healthcare, I suppose in a way the best hope actually is that universal healthcare or some variation on that is very popular in the United States. If the Democrats can go into the 2022 midterm election saying the only issue here is whether or not you can have healthcare, that's why we have to flip the Senate, then that would presumably be not a bad argument for that. So the optimistic vision for Americans getting free healthcare is that there are some Republican senators, or that the Democrats win Georgia, in which case, yes. But if the Democrats don't win Georgia, then the issue is, can there be enough pressure put on some Republican senators that they feel they could lose their seat if they don't allow some form of healthcare reform, however moderate, to go through. But I wouldn't hold my breath, because it's a system that makes that very hard. Okay, next story. It's been a strange 3 days in politics because for once it's been filled with a decent amount of good news. On Saturday we had the end of Trump. Today we might have the end of COVID-19. Yes, this is the news that a vaccine for COVID-19 has been shown to be safe and effective. The vaccine is being developed by American firm Pfizer and the German company BioNTech. or BioNTech. It has been tested on 43,500 people in 6 countries. Now, of that study, of all the people who've been given COVID-19, 92 people, of all the people who've been given either the vaccine or the placebo, 92 people on that study have caught COVID. And the comparison between the groups who got the real vaccine and those who didn't shows that the vaccine itself reduces the chance of catching the virus by 90%. It's very significant. Someone who knows more about vaccines than me, Jonathan Van Tam, the Deputy Chief Medical Officer, sounded incredibly positive about the developments in today's government press conference.
This is really a very important scientific breakthrough. I'm certain of that. I want to first of all begin to thank people around the world, including here in the UK, who have been clinical trials volunteers. We would not be talking to you about the news today if there weren't volunteers who go into clinical trials to help us find cures and vaccines against this awful disease. And thank you also to the hundreds of thousands of unsung scientists in the vaccine industry who've worked around the clock and are still working around the clock trying to find yet further vaccines for the world. This is truly appreciated. So today's news is the first vaccine and the first step, and it is very exciting.
It is very exciting. Let's celebrate some good news for once. So John Bell, Regius Professor of Medicine at Oxford University, went even further than Jonathan Van Tam. He is also a member of the government's vaccine task force. Here he is speaking to Sarah Montague on The World at 1 on Radio 4 this afternoon.
Do we now say with confidence that life should be returning to normal by spring?
Yes. I'm probably the first guy to say that, but I will say that with some confidence.
That's fabulous news. Professor John Bell, thank you so much for talking to us.
A very lovely video there. So in the medium term, this seems like good news. I haven't really seen many people at all saying, oh, this is actually just hot air. It's probably not going to happen. The consensus seems to be that this is very good news and we should have a vaccine, within a few months. There was a word of warning, though, from Jonathan Van Tam that this does not mean the crisis is over. This is also from today's government press conference.
So what do we know about the vaccine? Well, we know this particular vaccine prevents disease. That's clear from the effectiveness readout that we've had today. What we don't know yet, and where you have to be patient and stick with us, is that we don't know what this means yet for when we can get life back to normal, when we can start to lift some of the restrictions that we live under. Frankly, we're in the middle of the second wave, and I don't see the vaccine making any difference for the wave we are now in. I'm hopeful that it may prevent future waves, but this one we have to battle through to the end without vaccine.
So, that all makes sense. The vaccine will be around it looks like we might have people getting their first doses around Christmas, but it's not going to be a solution to coronavirus until the spring, which means that all of the potential deaths which are going to come in this second wave, it didn't take long, of course, for tens of thousands of people to die in spring, and we've got the same amount of time in between now and when a vaccine can be rolled out properly for us all to work through. So we will see a lot of pain, a lot of trauma in between now and that point at which the vaccine comes online. But Ash, this is undeniably good news, right? This second lockdown is going to be much more tolerable, knowing that there is a light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah, no, this is unequivocally good news. And I think one of the things that's really wonderful about the news of a vaccine on the horizon is that it means that so far, when we've talked about going back to normal, there's been a kind of implicit exclusion of people who've got clinical vulnerabilities or are elderly, right? So within that, there's been a kind of invisible hierarchy of who has the right to a public life anymore and who doesn't. And I think that's been one of the really pernicious things around Just Shield as being proposed as a solution to managing coronavirus and the risk posed to different kinds of people. So yeah, the idea that you can restore some kind of social contact, public life for people who've had to really lead half a life since March, I just think is so encouraging. There's also, and I'm not going to lie, there's this huge bit of me which has been so wounded by promises being made and not fulfilled by this government in particular. Boris Johnson at the beginning of the crisis predicting it was all going to be over within 3 months. You've got Operation Moonshot, which is a complete shambles. The various promises being made in terms of the availability of antibody testing, that I maintain a little bit of expect the worst, hope for the best. Just because I think if I put all my eggs in the basket of, I'm going to be in the club by spring, I might not be as resilient if that doesn't happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, I mean, it's very important to say that because a vaccine is around the corner doesn't mean now is the time to relax. In fact, it means kind of the opposite. It means that now is precisely when we can tolerate really some strict measures for a short period of time, because we know there's something on the other side. What many people were arguing when they sort of said we shouldn't have a lockdown is that if we have to learn to live with this virus forever, then we can't keep locking down. But if it seems like a vaccine is around in 4 months, then to save tens of thousands of lives, it probably is worth us being in lockdown for most of the winter. Obviously not pleasant, but if we've got a vaccine in spring and that can save thousands of lives, it does seem like the sensible option.
Can I add to that one thing? Because the danger of going, there's a vaccine on the horizon in 4 months' time, is that it almost justifies Boris Johnson and his government's strategy of just kicking the can down the road, not really prioritising too much of any one thing. Whereas I think in some ways it's wisest for the government to behave as though there isn't a vaccine around the corner. And in order to emerge from this lockdown that we're currently in, we're going to have to look more towards the East Asian model of pandemic management. We've got really rigorous border testing. You've got lockdowns, which are actually lockdowns. You quarantine people outside of the home. And then it means you can approach a kind of normalcy in which clinically vulnerable and elderly people can also participate because you've suppressed the virus to that extent. And that should be the goal that we push the government towards. I do wonder about this news. It's almost letting them off the hook a little bit in terms of everything they fucked up so far. So that's my little other word of warning.
Just because a story has a happy ending doesn't mean we have to forgive everyone who fucked up along the way. Let's go to the issue of distribution, because obviously it seems like we're going to have an effective vaccine, but how quickly can it be rolled out? That's the question on everyone's lips. And we can go to the BBC for an explanation, as this was in their write-up of the story. They write, a limited number of people may get the vaccine this year. Pfizer and BioNTech say they will have enough safety data by the 3rd week of November to take their vaccine to regulators. Until it has been approved, it will not be possible for countries to begin their vaccination campaigns. The two companies say they will be able to supply 50 million doses by the end of this year and around 1.3 billion by the end of 2021. Each person needs 2 doses. The UK should get 10 million doses by the end of the year, with a further 30 million doses already ordered. So you can see there lots. The vaccine looks like it's going to come online quite quickly. They're saying 1.3 billion by the end of 2021. If everyone has to take 2 doses of this vaccine before they have immunity, well, it's going to be about 600 million people, isn't it? So, I mean, the demand from the left has to be that we have to be distributing this equitably, not just to the countries that have the highest incomes, but to the countries which are in the most need. My guess would be that in countries like the UK, at least, I would hope that this is probably going to be distributed within our country somewhat equitably. It seems like from what the government is saying, this is going to go to the people who are most vulnerable first, so people in older age groups, people with health conditions which make them more vulnerable to COVID-19, and healthcare workers. I'm not sure if they'll have such a sort of rational approach in those countries without an NHS, but probably the bigger issue really here is that what countries are able to buy up these vaccines. Is it just going to be that, countries in South America, countries with lower income and less sort of intimate relationships with the kind of companies who are coming up with these vaccines, they are going to have to tolerate the sort of, the hellishness of living with COVID-19 for a few years to come. That's going to be the political battle ahead. The other problem is we don't really know how long immunity lasts. So it could be the case that whilst this is shown to be effective in the short term, if it wears off in 6 months, we're going to have the problem of of having to revaccinate everyone over and over again every year. I mean, again, that wouldn't be the end of the world. We do that with the flu vaccine. We vaccinate people once a year. If we did that with coronavirus, it's still good news. And in terms of distribution, so I just told you the sort of 1.2 billion or 1.3 billion that Pfizer says they can distribute. Even more positive than that, it does seem like the fact that Pfizer have come up with a successful vaccine means that many of the other vaccines, which are currently in production or in the experimental phases, are more likely to pull through. If one works, we can expect others will too. We're going to go back to Jonathan Van Tam, who explains why that's the case with some quite colourful analogies.
So the current vaccine that's being announced, its results are announced today, targets the S protein of the coronavirus. And so far, all we knew was that vaccines could give us antibodies against the S protein. We did not know if vaccines would prevent disease, and so this is a huge milestone. But more importantly, it is good news for many other vaccines to come, because almost all of the vaccines coming also target the S protein. So this is like, getting to the end of a playoff final. It's gone to penalties. The first player goes up, scores the goal. You haven't won the cup yet, but what it does is it tells you that the goalkeeper can be beaten. And that's where we are today, that first sign.
That was Jonathan Van Tam there. Ash, I want to go to you because I know you watch more football than me. Does that make sense? If the first football player scores the penalty, then that makes it more likely that the others will. I thought, isn't the goalkeeper nearly always kind of beatable? Did that analogy make sense to you?
Okay, I mean, the thing is that the mechanics of the analogy don't line up, because obviously coronavirus isn't sentient, and why after the first goal goes in, you're more likely to beat the keeper is because their head's gone. Confidence is gone.
Okay, I see.
The kind of self-delusion and belief of I will stop every goal that comes up, that's gone. But in terms of statistics, he's right. So that's where the analogy is correct. In terms of the mechanics of the thing, it's a little shonky, shall we say. But there's one thing that I wanted to say, and it was about the distribution of the vaccine, because of course older and people with clinical vulnerabilities, those are the people who are being prioritized. But one thing I would like to see is that as it's distributed through the working age population, is that it's prioritized in such a way that reflects the way different kinds of people have been exposed to different kinds of risk because of their living situations and because of how they have to work. Because we all know that Black and Asian minority ethnic people in this country have been disproportionately impacted by coronavirus, even when you adjust for age. And there are two reasons why that is. One is socioeconomic factors, the way in which poverty is linked to particular healthcare outcomes and particular housing conditions. And then the other is what kind of work are you in? How public facing is your role? How much contact do you have with other people? How protected are you by your employers even? So what I would like to see is, rather than it being rolled out with like Bangladesh is first of the queue, is that actually you've got people who are in those key roles as security guards and shelf stackers and cleaners and porters, is that in the working age population, they get protected first, not the people who've been able to work from home all this time, the people who've been exposed to the virus all of this time, and that's been reflected in the death rates.
We've got a couple of super chats. Michael Booth with a $5, DVB with a $5. Oh, we could talk for hours about this. DVB says, I know people who sympathise with Trump and are no racists. If we don't respect, understand and win them over, Trumpism will come and bite us in 4 years. I don't think everyone that votes for Donald Trump is a racist. 70 million people voted for Donald Trump. Obviously, a big part of the motivation for voting for Donald Trump can be racism, or at least a toleration of racism, because he doesn't exactly hide it. But obviously, yeah, I mean, if anyone wants to win an election, you have to take seriously the people who aren't voting for you. And I think the Democrats need to be doing some hard thinking about how they can win people over who are attracted to Trumpism. And actually, I'm going to part this because it's going to come up heavily in our next story. So the rest of the show is about the impacts of Biden's win for the rest of the world. Obviously, America still the imperial superpower. Who gets elected there affects many people who don't get to vote in that country. The first area we're going to talk about is indirect, so the lessons politicians around the world, in particular Keir Starmer, are learning from Biden's victory and also the narrowness of that victory. So how Trump managed to get so close. And the second and third effects are direct. So how will American power be used under Joe Biden, both to influence global politics and specifically Brexit? First of all, in terms of political rows, the fallout from the US election will be familiar to most people living in Western democracies over the past 10 years. The questions people are asking: how was it that a right-wing xenophobic populist who's completely incompetent and openly lies could be voted for by such a large number of people? And second, a sort of internecine row that exists within the centre-left as to why they didn't perform as well as they expected to. On Friday's show, we talked about the slanging match that was going on within the Democratic Party, centrists within that party sort of blaming the fact that they didn't get a stomping majority, a huge blue wave in that election last week on members of the left caucus, people, progressives, and within the Democratic Party who they say are scaring off moderate voters. AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, in a very interesting interview in the New York Times on the weekend, hit back. And we're going to go to some of the quotes from that interview. So AOC says, "I've already started looking into the actual functioning of these campaigns. And the thing is, I've been unseating Democrats for 2 years. I've been defeating the DCC-run campaigns for 2 years." So that's the official Democratic campaign organization. "That's how I got to Congress. That's how we elected Ayanna Pressley. That's how Jamal Bowman won. That's how Cori Bush won. And so we know about extreme vulnerabilities in how Democrats run campaigns." She goes on. "Some of this is criminal. It's malpractice. Conor Lamb spent $2,000 on Facebook the week before the election. I don't think anybody who is not on the internet in a real way in the year of our Lord 2020 and loses an election can blame anyone else when you're not even really on the internet." Ash, I want your thoughts on this because, we're going to get more comments from that interview because there's loads of really interesting content there. But just how bold it is when you've got centrist Democrats blaming AOC and blaming the left caucus for losing elections. And AOC is like, look, I can teach you about how you lost because I've spent the last 2 years beating you. You can't really imagine like Momentum saying that. Like, yeah, we know how to beat you because we've been deselected. Everyone in Momentum has to say, oh no, we're super loyal. We would never campaign against anyone in the Labour Party. Whereas she's saying like, look, I know your weaknesses because I've been exploiting them for 2 years.
Also the problem is that Momentum haven't been deselecting people.
Sure.
So they can't make that same claim to effectiveness in their operation within the party because it didn't exist in the same way. In a large part because they don't have, a primary system for incumbent candidates. For me, the thing that was really striking is that AOC is making these points which should chime with a centrist worldview. All right, these aren't inherently ideological things to say your ground game is weak, your digital game is weak. Why weren't you putting money into Facebook at a time where, everyone's at home because of the pandemic? Why weren't you prioritizing getting out and door knocking the way that, Rashida Tlaib was, for instance? And she points out that in order to be as effective as he was, Obama had to set up an entirely separate campaigning wing from the DCC. But people don't want to listen because of the message bringer, and I think that's more to their detriment. I think maybe because of the parallel success of Stacey Abrams and voter registration, there will be some willingness to learn from those kind of big organizing models. But maybe the DCC aren't going to turn around and go, oh wow, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was right the whole time. I think one of the things that this interview does signal about AOC is that she really is one of the most able politicians that the Anglophone left has. I think that one of the things that has held us back in terms of seeing our movement politics be as successful as it could be once it's reflected within the electoral system is, quite frankly, it's rare to have a candidate who is that excellent at communicating, also that good at organising, who's got the politics, who can do media, has got self-discipline, and all of those things. I think it's been something which has been sorely missing from the Labour left, and I think it's something which has held us back. So I think that there's one thing to take seriously in terms of how you find a left-wing candidate and put them in the right places to win the right races and, unseat incumbents, is that you've really got to be looking for those qualities that AOC, Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib all have in absolute buckets and spades. It's something which Obama had as well. His politics are very, very different from mine. I've always been a critic of Obama and what he did in office, particularly when it comes to deportations and drone strikes. But he was an excellent candidate. He was a once-in-a-lifetime candidate in a way that Clinton wasn't, in a way that Biden isn't. And so I think when the left looks for somebody to organize around, we've got to be honest with the fact that they are going to be totemic, and they're going to be totemic of more than values. They're going to have all these skills, which very few political operators are in possession of.
Yeah, and what was clear in this interview again is that AOC, has to be that skillful because she is being attacked from all sides. Obviously, the right in America are obsessed with AOC and demonizing everything she stands for. But as she described in this interview, so are many within her own party. So asked if she would run for the Senate, currently she's in the House of Representatives, AOC said she wasn't even sure she wanted to be in politics. She explained why by saying the following: "It's the incoming, it's the stress, it's the violence, it's the lack of support from your own party. It's your own party thinking you're the enemy. When your own colleagues talk anonymously in the press and then turn around and say you're bad because you actually append your name to your opinion." This will be a sort of attitude towards the left, which is recognizable to many people in the Labour Party. Many people, obviously, in this country pointing out the mirrors, the parallels between the Democratic establishment and our Labour right. But what has Keir Starmer learnt from Biden's win? And how does he fit into this current battle going on between the centre-left and the left, not just in America, but in centre-left parties around the world? Well, handily, he wrote on just this subject in today's Guardian. So you can see that the piece in general, the hook is sort of he's being prime ministerial. He wants to get involved in Biden putting the US back onto the world stage. But it also contained a nugget about what strategic lessons he's going to be learning from Biden's victory. So he writes, "The Democrats' path to victory was paved by a broad coalition, including many of the states and communities that 4 years ago turned away from them. To win back the trust of voters takes time. It takes political leaders who listen, learn, and renew. Biden spoke to the soul of the nation with a focus on who people are and what they value: family, community, and security. One election victory does not mean that work is now finished for the Democrats. For us in the Labour Party, it is only just beginning." He was also asked about the tactical lessons he'd draw from Biden on LBC this morning.
I think there's a lesson there for the Labour Party about coalition building and looking to people who haven't voted Labour and listening and engaging in a different way. And this is something I think is very important for the Labour Party now, which is for all political parties, but particularly for mine, which is when people don't vote for you, you don't look at them and say, you're wrong. You actually look at them and say, can we have a discussion? Because if we lost an election as badly as we did last December, we need to look at ourselves rather than the electorate. And I do think there's something about coalition building here and bringing people together. And I think, particularly in light of COVID-19, people are desperate for that sense of coming together now.
I agree. Let's have a sense of coming together, which means you probably shouldn't suspend the previous leader, especially when you stood on a platform to unite the party. I think what we should learn from Biden's win, and actually I don't think we need to push back that strongly against Keir Starmer's idea that you need to talk about family, community and security. I do think these are issues that matter to people. I think probably Corbyn didn't speak about them enough. I think you do have to put the work in to try and give those concepts some progressive content so that you're not just sort of leaning into and reinforcing either patriarchal or xenophobic or authoritarian narratives. But I think, the left have to, in my view, own those spaces. And I think some of Starmer's priorities when it comes to, giving a unifying message which could win back the red wall are similar to what Biden managed to do in, for example, the blue wall in the United States. I do think there were sensible elements of Biden's campaign which can be repeated here. But there is a severe danger that centrists in this country and Keir Starmer in this country miss one of the key messages, the key lessons of Biden's victory, which is that actually in contradiction to how Keir Starmer is behaving at the moment, he was very effective. Joe Biden was very effective at keeping the left on board. It's notable elsewhere in that interview with AOC, she said, whilst we've had incredible hostility from many centrists in this party in Congress, Joe Biden has actually been relatively pleasant, relatively doing outreach with the left. There was obviously a joint committee between the Bernie campaign and the Biden campaign to come up with various agreements. And Bernie himself said that Joe Biden, they get on personally. Joe Biden doesn't seem to be someone who treats the left with contempt and disrespect. The campaign, the primary, was run on the basis that, look, we have different politics. I'm a moderate, you're a progressive. I think my politics are better. And he won on that platform. So I think the left were very willing to say, we're happy to be the junior partner in this election campaign. And the Democratic base was extraordinarily united in this campaign, much more so than Hillary Clinton, who really did try and demonize the left. You'll remember her campaign always talking about Bernie bros, trying to demonize Bernie Sanders supporters as people who are not welcome within the Democratic coalition. Very different message from Joe Biden. And there was an interesting tweet from Lewis Goodall on the weekend, so policy editor at Newsnight. So he writes, quite a bit of misunderstanding about the sort of politics Biden ran on. His deputy campaign manager told Meet the Press today that Biden ran on an incredibly progressive platform, and he'll be honouring that. Biden isn't on the left, but he did take his party's left with him. Ash, I want to get your thoughts on this. Do you think there is a big danger that centrists in this country and Keir Starmer in this country are not learning the lesson from Joe Biden, which is that, to be honest, if in a Democratic election you win fair and square over the left, which I think Biden really did over Bernie. Obviously, he had the establishment on side, he had the media on side. I think if we had a completely different media ecology, Bernie probably would have won, but we don't, and I don't really think Joe Biden played that dirty. The left are willing to be the junior partner in an election like this. That's what they did then. If the candidate lets them, treats them with the respect and sort of welcomes them in. And it doesn't seem at the moment that Keir Starmer's willing to do that.
No, Keir Starmer's not interested in doing that. He's interested in kinnicking us into oblivion. And his tactic in front of the press is to kick the left in the head and go, look, there's no conflict here. I'm actually a unifier. And that's because what he's saying and his opponent of choice is so detested by the press that you're able to invisibilize that as a form of political antagonism at all. And that's because the left is more disempowered in this country for very specific reasons. One is that we don't have the same kind of sheer numbers as the left in the United States does. But the second one is that we have been defeated at the ballot box, whereas the Sanders left has not been in the same way. 2019 was really a pretext for, the right and the center to align and say, let's just completely obliterate the existence of the Corbyn project from the history books. No curiosity about where it came from, no curiosity about who might still be invested in it. The line is, you were all idiots if you ever believed that things like, free tuition and a functioning welfare system were good things. So I think that what happens in terms of how the British media approach a Democrat win, and I said this earlier, I was on Radio 4 with Phil Collins, not in the Air Tonight Phil Collins, the other Phil Collins. And the thing that I said is, look, everyone looks at what's gone on in the United States, and what they see reflected back to them is a vision of the Labour Party that they personally want to see. They're incapable of looking at the various contradictions and tensions and nuances and seeing anything other than the biases and the prejudices that they already approach this with. So I think that when people say, look, Biden won by completely locking off his left, by refusing to be cowed by them, well, that's not true. Bernie Sanders and AOC had a tremendous amount of influence on Biden's green policy. I doubt that he'd have gone half as far had it not been for the Sunrise Movement. It's also the case that Biden, I think, did appeal to this kind of real, clear line, soul of the nation kind of narrative, and it didn't work down ballot. It got him into the White House, but it didn't deliver the kind of blue wave that he would need to bring in, huge transformative change through stonking majority in the Senate and also losses as well. That was an area where I did differ with Starmer, actually. It was when he said that, Biden didn't turn around to people who voted Trump and go, you were wrong. In fact, he did that all the time. He did that all the time. I just don't think that you saw him do that very much with white voters. He did that with voters of color who expressed doubt or hesitation or skepticism about his candidacy. There was one famous interview where he was asked, what would you say to black people who want to vote for Trump? He said, well, I'd say you ain't blackjack. A Latino voter who was critical of Obama's deportation policy, he turned around and said, well, you may as well vote for Trump. What's interesting to me is that it's, assumed, it's baked in that because people of color generally have nowhere to go, that you can treat them as badly as you like. And that's where the kind of political clout from having movement politics, which can successfully challenge the establishment, comes in. That's the only way in which racial minorities are going to be able to have their voices deemed as equal in any way. But white voters, it's assumed, are a lot more skittish. You can't go, hang on, maybe you are being motivated by a sense of racial grievance when you say that Jeremy Corbyn wants all the Muslims to come to Scarborough and take it over. Real thing that I heard on the doorstep, by the way, Scarborough, which is like 98% white. White voters are a lot more skittish. You can't say, well, actually, you're wrong, or the values that you hold are fundamentally incompatible. I'm not saying that to do so is an election-winning strategy, and I think that one of the things that the left and progressives needs to get better at doing, something I read on Twitter, which is stop sharing the recipe and serve the brownie. So rather than obsessing with, should we call these people racist or not, is go, well, actually, how do you develop and, hegemonize a sense of racial literacy amongst white voters? Just do the damn thing. But yeah, I kind of think that centrists see the values that they want to see in the Biden campaign, don't necessarily see him the candidate within the whole.
There's a comment from Roriki Hutchinson. No, he did do that to a white working class guy too, which is true. I watched a video actually today of Biden telling an old white guy, don't vote for me, you're too old. I think the context was that the old white guy had said that he was too old to be president. But he did sort of in a personal capacity often say, don't vote for me then, vote for Trump if you don't want this. But I think the campaign in general, he was quite successful at keeping the various wings of the party on side, which meant that you had people like Nalini Stamp mobilizing in Philadelphia, people like Stacey Abrams mobilizing in Georgia, and they didn't feel like they had been, beaten, downtrodden, and humiliated in a similar way to how Hillary Clinton tried to treat Bernie Sanders and his people. And it seems now how Keir Starmer is trying to treat Jeremy Corbyn and his supporters. And I think the point you raised there, which I think is really important, Ash, is this isn't just about the left and right within a party. It's not just who gets to govern, who gets to decide what policies we adopt, because this also stands in as a proxy for various strategies. Are you only going to focus on winning swing voters who are generally Tory, Labour, or in this case, Democrat, Republican? Swing voters tend to be white, tend to be reasonably off. Are you going to direct all of your energies to them and take black and brown people and young people for granted, or are you going to focus on both? And I think the danger with Keir Starmer is he's saying, I'm only interested in the red wall. He's taking people in the inner cities, people of ethnic minorities, somewhat for granted. And there are many people in the Democratic Party who want to do the same. So someone who put this better than myself is AOC. We're going to go back to that interview. I really recommend reading it because the whole thing is full of lots of incredibly insightful content. But we're going to go to another question that was asked about her. So the question is, what if the administration is hostile, if they take the John Kasich view of who Joe Biden should be? What do you do? And background for this question, John Kasich, again, you can see this on social media, he was saying he was obviously a Republican presidential candidate. He ended up being an anyone but Trumper. He backed the Democrats in this election. And he went on the television this weekend sort of saying what the Democrats have to do is they have to tell the radical left, you're not welcome in this party. You've got nothing to do with the Democrats, so they can appeal to moderates. So in response to this opinion of how democratic strategy should be formed, she says, well, I'd be bummed, because we're going to lose. And that's just what it is. These transition appointments, they send a signal. They tell a story of who the administration credits with this victory. And so it's going to be really hard after immigrant youth activists help potentially deliver Arizona and Nevada. It's going to be really hard after Detroit and Rashida Tlaib ran up the numbers in her district. It's really hard for us to turn out non-voters when they feel like nothing changes for them, when they feel like people don't see them or even acknowledge their turnout. If the party believes that 94% of Detroit went to Biden after black organizers just doubled and tripled turnout in Georgia after so many people organized Philadelphia, the signal from the Democratic Party is that John Kasich's won us this election. I mean, I can't even describe how dangerous that is. And I think that's such an important point. And again, maybe I'm going to sound soft to you now, but I think in a way, the dichotomy fails. So there has been this constant battle, I think, between centrists and the left over the past 5 years of, no, what we need to do is increase turnout among our base, that's how we win. No, what we need to do is appeal to swing voters, that's how we win. Either of them on their own lose, actually. I'm sorry to say, either of them on their own tend to lose. So obviously there is a growing demographic out in all Western democracies in favor of radical change and left populism, but it's not yet a majority. And when, that has been the message, we haven't won majorities, partly because of entrenched media power. But the other option, going to the other end of the spectrum, when you've had centrist parties who've sort of disrespected their base, who've taken urban young voters for granted, they've also lost. That's what we call PASOKification, when you've got the traditional centre-left who are absolutely declining. Now, for me, it seems obvious that the only way we can possibly move forward is you have a party which spans both of those groups, and you have the sort of Biden candidate who's a reassuring figure saying, look, of course, I'm not going to defund the police. I'm not particularly a socialist. But you also have the AOCs within the party who are mobilizing the base and saying, yes, whilst this country might not yet be ready for defund the police and socialism, we are still a force within this party who can make sure you are represented. We're going to keep the establishment within this party on their toes. That's the only way, it seems to me, that you can win a majority in Western democracies at this point in time. And I think we should all be able to agree on that. But that is not how Keir Starmer is currently behaving. We're going to go straight on to our next story, which is another big one. So that was sort of the indirect effects of Biden's win, what people are learning from that election result. We're going to go to something a bit more direct now. The effect of Biden on American empire. Americans are breathing a sigh of relief at the end of Donald Trump. But what does his downfall mean for the rest of the world? After all, imperial pursuits have bipartisan support in Washington. And whilst Trump's erratic outbursts and open white supremacy were a departure from the norm in recent administrations, the status quo ante seems just as, if not more, deadly. So people say, Trump is the worst president ever. They look back to George W. Bush as someone who behaved civilly, who treated his opponents with respect. But he is also someone who entered the United States into a much deadlier war than Donald Trump ever did, the Iraq War. And as I imagine you already know, Joe Biden voted for that. So should we celebrate a chaotic, erratic liability to empire, really, in Donald Trump, being replaced by potentially a more competent manager of American empire? This is a question I was grappling with. I spoke earlier today to academic and Novara media columnist David Waring on whether anti-imperialists and internationalists should have cause to celebrate the fall of Donald Trump.
Well, I mean, it's all imperialism. That's point one. But there's a lot to say beyond that. I mean, an empire, especially one like this, world's greatest military power, like in history, huge amount of destructive force in terms of nuclear weapons, in terms of the military, etc., etc. Who runs that system of power really matters. It's not enough to just say they're all imperialists. Like, what do they do with that power? How do they exert it? Because that's a matter of life or death for millions. And I think the thing to say about Joe Biden is it's a return to the US foreign policy establishment, which sounds bad given Iraq and Afghanistan and things like that. And it is bad, but I think it's better. It's better than Trump, who is very unpredictable, very aggressive in his use of military power, particularly in terms of Iran, where he was really trying to pick a fight with Iran to some extent, and that was a very volatile situation. Whereas I think the centre of gravity in the US foreign policy establishment at the moment is very much post-Iraq and Afghanistan, very much kind of, we went in over our heads. So there's an imperialist critique of Iraq and Afghanistan, and the anti-imperialist critique is it was a crime, war, aggression, etc., etc. There's an imperialist critique, which is that it didn't work, and that was the one that guided Barack Obama. And it seems that Joe Biden, notwithstanding the fact that he was something of a hawk on foreign policy, military policy in the 90s and the early 2000s, he seems to have mellowed quite considerably. So according to press reports during the Obama presidency, whenever there was a debate about intervention, it would be Hillary Clinton or someone like that who was the hawk, and Biden who was much more dovish. He was quite dovish about surging troops into Afghanistan in the early part of Obama's presidency. He was dovish on Libya. He was dovish on Syria. So I think what you can probably expect from Biden is it's going to be imperialism, the same structures of violence apply, the same arms sales to Israel, for example. But within that, I suspect to be much less aggressive, much less volatile, much more cautious, like Obama was quite cautious, relatively speaking, within those parameters. So it's unlikely you're going to get any big proactive interventions and a big interventionist agenda like George W. Bush had. It's going to be something much more, let's just try and keep out of those major commitments.
I thought that idea about Joe Biden sort of shifting over time, and the fact that, yes, he's still going to be managing American empire, but it's even the American establishment, the American liberal establishment, have moved on a bit from invading Iraq, not because they suddenly become anti-imperialist, but because they've realized that these adventurous wars aren't necessarily what's in the best interest of the United States. Obviously, with Donald Trump, there was always a risk that he would undertake an action which was self-destructive to US empire, but which also caused millions of deaths along the way. So some reassurance there from David Warren. We're going to get in a moment to how the left should still be on their toes. But first of all, there is the issue that Joe Biden can't necessarily do exactly what he wants unless there is an upset in Georgia and the Democrats take 2 seats in that state, something they haven't done for a very long time. You're going to have a Democratic president who is constrained by a Republican Senate with a veto power. And we were reminded this weekend by Mitt Romney, supposedly a moderate Republican, about the sadistic priorities that the Republican Party will still be imposing on this particular administration.
I'm not going to talk about my vote. That's in the rearview mirror. I'm going to talk now about how I can work with the new president. I know he's on the other side of the aisle, but I want to make sure that we conservatives keep on fighting to make sure that we don't have a Green New Deal, we don't get rid of gas and coal and oil, that we don't have a Medicare for all plan put in place, that we don't raise taxes on American enterprise. That would kill the economy. So, look, I congratulate him, but I'm not going to put aside conservative principles. We're going to fight for the things that we believe in.
We're going to fight for the things that we believe in. How morally degraded do you have to be? What are your main priorities in politics? What got you into politics? Well, I'm here to make sure that we cannot have any resolution to climate change and that we can't have universal healthcare. There's 2 major priorities. And obviously this matters for more than just Americans. If you have a Republican Senate whose main commitment is to blocking any action on climate change, that's going to be absolutely disastrous for the rest of us. So how constrained will Biden be by the Senate? David Waring again.
Biden, if you believed what he was saying to people like Bernie Sanders, to various American journalists, he got the sense during this year, especially with regard to COVID, that there was an opportunity for him not to be just a manager of the system, but to do something quite dramatic, something like FDR. And we've always got to be a bit wary of claims like this after everyone got their wallet inspected by Keir Starmer making similar, claims to be a transformative, leader. But I think Biden did have at least some sense that he wanted to push through something quite dramatic economically. It might not have been enough to do with climate, but deadlock in the Senate will make it very, very hard for him to do. I mean, there are things you could do with executive power. You can sign certain executive orders that can change regulation in the US. A lot can be done at the state level as well, to the extent that Democrats have got power in big states like California, which have a huge economic output, bigger economic output than a lot of countries. There's still action that can be taken by Democrats to the extent that they want to.
There's still some action that can be taken by Democrats, especially on the state level. But to be honest, we've got to have our fingers crossed that the Democrats do flip the Senate in Georgia if we want any sort of dramatic international interventions from the Americans, although I suppose we can't really expect dramatic international intervention from the Americans, but what we want them to do is not block serious action on climate change, which is what they've historically done and what the Republicans seem massively committed to doing. So given all of this is all the context. What should we expect from Biden? What are going to be the restrictions placed on him? What are the things he seems to want? That's been laid out by David Waring. Given all of that, what should be the left's priorities? Obviously, this is not a president who we should suddenly, sit back and say, "Oh, it's fine. Donald Trump is gone now. We've got Joe Biden in. He'll be fighting for a better world." No, none of us are naive enough to believe that. So what should the left be focusing on when it comes to getting positive change out of a Biden administration, or at least limiting the damage that the American presidency can do over the next 4 years? David Waring again.
Okay, so there's a bunch of things I think the left will have to pay attention to. He's pledged to end the war in Yemen. He's pledged to pull the plug on that. He's got to actually do that now. And one of the reasons, this is really, really worth stressing, one of the reasons that there's this almost bipartisan consensus, apart from Trump, about ending the war in Yemen is that people like Bernie Sanders and other progressives in Congress push for it. It's down to public pressure. If there hadn't been public and political pressure around the war in Yemen, there wouldn't be any question of it ending. So that pressure's got to be maintained so that war ends. With regard to Iran, there's still a pretty devastating blockade on Iran, which is really hurting the Iranian people. Biden wants to go back into the nuclear deal with Iran, and that would hopefully open up things for the Iranian people to be able to trade with the rest of the world. Again, the left needs to push Biden on that. What else? I mean, Israel-Palestine. I can't imagine that Biden is going to have or want to spend the political capital, finite political capital, on doing anything about Israel-Palestine. And even if he did want to do something, every time a Democrat president has gone to that issue, the deal that they've proposed has been one that throws the Palestinians under the bus. So people have got to at least push for a less one-sided, it's still going to be one-sided, but a less one-sided approach to Israel. A normally functioning US empire is still pretty horrible, and it's a system built on violence, as all empires are. And we shouldn't get too grateful that, something close to fascism has been got rid of. I mean, that's not the bar we should set ourselves. Trump's gone, and now we're back in just the normal run of things with regard to US imperialism, and there's plenty to fight on with regards to that.
That was David Waring, academic and Novara media columnist, and you can check out more of his thoughts on what a Biden presidency would mean for the rest of the world in a column for Novara Media. I do really recommend that article. Ash, I want to bring you in now. Obviously, you see big debates on Twitter among the left. Should you celebrate a Biden presidency when he's just going to be another, imperial commander-in-chief, or not? I mean, it's kind of binary way of looking at the world. But I mean, the perspective that David Waring put forward seems fairly uncontroversial, doesn't it? That obviously we cannot rest on our laurels. This is still going to be a president who is overseeing a structurally imperialist administration. But people manage empires differently, and you can have presidents who are more catastrophic than others. Obviously, in this century, George W. Bush had a much more deadly presidency than Barack Obama. It just so happened that Donald Trump also did, although with Trump, you could just never tell what was going to happen. With Biden, potentially we can expect a kind of stable consistency, which is, not particularly progressive, but also which isn't going to lead us into the apocalypse. I mean, what do you make of it?
I mean, so one of the things that Trump got criticized for was mismanagement of American imperialism. So I'm not just talking about with regards to the Middle East here, which is David Waring's area of expertise and quite naturally his area of focus because of the disastrous, bloody campaigns fought in Afghanistan and Iraq, but Latin America as well. So it'd be interesting to see what the left does with that in terms of, Joe Biden's, foreign policy orientation when it comes to Venezuela or when it comes to Bolivia. Lots of liberal commentators I saw greeted the restoration of Mas after the coup, which saw Evo Morales kicked out of power, as evidence that Trump couldn't be trusted to deal with the socialists in his own backyard of South America. So I think that this is going to be an interesting point of tension between the left and a future Biden administration, because there are going to be lots of people in positions of significant influence within his cabinet, I should imagine, who'll be saying, right, that means it's business as usual in Latin America, even if adventurous military interventions in the Middle East are widely discredited. The functioning of American empire in Latin America, I think, is going to be incredibly important.
I totally agree, by the way. Although, again, I mean, I think what's interesting here is not necessarily to see it as a partisan thing, but see it as sort of cycles of imperialism. I mean, JFK was a much celebrated democratic leader. It was him who went into the Bay of Pigs and really accelerated America's intervention in Vietnam. But what, I spoke to David for a while. What he was talking about is that currently sort of the liberal managerial class in the United States have been a bit burned by the Iraq War, that they saw that actually did weaken American power, and sort of even though the Iraq War did actually, it was American imperialism malfunctioning. It didn't strengthen that country. It caused catastrophic, it had enormous catastrophic human cost. So it's not necessarily the case that what's bad for US empire is good for everyone else, because an empire making mistakes can be just as deadly. We're going to go to some super chats before we go to our final story, which is the effect of a Biden presidency on the United Kingdom. But some super chats we have. Tegan Tallulah with a tenner. What can the UK left learn from the success of the Justice Democrats, and could we use some version of their model here? Yes, I think we can learn loads from them. I mean, what's unfortunate is that the model of the Justice Democrats worked very well in the American political system, where you have basically open primaries. What they did is they picked incredibly inspiring candidates and then put them forward in the open primary system to challenge incumbents. Obviously, the rules we have in this country when it comes to the Labour Party makes that slightly harder. We don't have open primaries. But I do think what we should have, and what should have happened under Corbyn, and it was a shame that it didn't, is an organisation who are trying to reach out and find, the most exciting candidates in our communities who can stand for in our case, the Labour Party. I mean, I know Unite the Union do this to some degree. They have a training programme. I mean, also, I would love us to have the confidence where we can be proud of standing against sort of incumbent establishment MPs in the Labour Party. But the dynamic is slightly different here to over there. But, lots to learn. Yuppie Pro Paste with $4.99. Biden is a win for the yuppies. Let's be real, comrades. Been waiting for this all weekend. Cheers, Novara Media. Glad you're better, Ash. Lots of content there, getting it all in. And I wouldn't say Biden's win is just for yuppies. I mean, I do think you do have a dynamic in the United States where yuppies are more likely to vote for Biden than Donald Trump. But the coalition who are backing Biden isn't just yuppies. It's also African Americans and Latinos who, as has been much publicized, potentially shifted a little bit to Donald Trump in this election, but still the vast majority of Latinos voted for Biden. And also, most low-income people voted for Biden, even though in 2016, in some specific states, low-income people switched to Trump, and that's what handed him the presidency. It is still the Democratic Party who attract the majority of poor, black and brown, queer people. So it's not just for yuppies, is my conclusion. Nathan Hughes, although, we appreciate the point. Nathan Hughes with a $5. Is it just me, or does anyone else want Ash to end a statement with, anyway, here's Wonderwall, and pick up the guitar behind her? Solidarity from Torbay. Will that ever happen? Can you play the guitar?
It's not my guitar. I did learn to play it a bit when I was a teenager, and thought that punk 3-chord progression was all I needed. But I was crap. I don't have musical instincts. I can't sing. I sound like a goose trapped in a wind turbine. And I decided at a certain point that I wanted long nails instead of being able to play the guitar. So that guitar belongs to my boyfriend. And maybe if you guys donate enough to Novara Media, I can drag him out wearing a Joe Biden mask and he can play Wonderwall.
Apparently Fox is the resident Novara guitarist. So if you can't do a Novara number, then Fox can do that. Maybe when we get to 100k subscribers, which is a reminder, hit subscribe if you haven't already. Juliet Jakes with a tenner, cash Sarkar. Great slogan. But that could be a fundraising drive in and of itself. Right, final story. What does a Biden presidency mean for Britain? We've just talked about what a Biden presidency means for the world, but what about for Brexit Britain? So after all, Trump might have made more enemies than friends in the White House, but one world leader who he did seem to get along with was Boris Johnson.
They're saying Britain Trump. They call him Britain Trump, and people are saying that's a good thing. That they like me over there. That's what they wanted. That's what they need. That's what they need. He'll get it done. Boris is good. He's going to do a good job.
So that analysis from Donald Trump, that Boris Johnson was a British version of himself, was shared by the president-elect Joe Biden. So he told a fundraiser in 2019 that Johnson was a physical and emotional clone of Donald Trump. So this doesn't seem to be a good sign for our Prime Minister. In particular, Johnson's past comments about Barack Obama are looked upon with disgust by many close to Biden. So the context here, we're going to go to those quotes from 2016. This was when Obama sort of intervened in the Brexit referendum by sort of encouraging people, a little bit obliquely to vote Remain. Johnson wrote in The Sun, pretty grotesquely, to be honest. I'm going to get up the quote. Some said it was a snub to Britain. Some said it was a symbol, and this is of Winston Churchill's bust being removed from the Oval Office. Some said it was a snub to Britain. Some said it was a symbol of the part Kenyan president's ancestral dislike of the British Empire, of which Churchill had been such a fervent defender. Really, grotesque, bringing up his Kenyan heritage as a reason why he might have moved Winston Churchill's bust. Apparently the bust is still in the White House. I think it just moved position. Anyway, this hasn't been forgotten in the US. So in response to a congratulatory message from Johnson to Biden, Obama's former national security spokesman tweeted the following. So he writes, "This shape-shifting creep weighs in. We will never forget your racist comments about Obama and slavish devotion to Trump. But neat Instagram graphic." So is Trump's loss and Biden's win really bad news for Boris Johnson? I spoke earlier to Professor Anand Menon.
There are certainly obstacles in the way of a close personal relationship. However, international politics doesn't work like that. The fact of the matter is that in a world where the West sees itself increasingly threatened by authoritarian powers, by the challenge of climate change, leaders across the West understand that even if the other leaders aren't their best mates, they need to work together. And I think that imperative will override any personal animosity when push comes to shove.
So realism in international relations will prevail over any kind of personal animosity or horror at what someone has said in the past. I kind of share that analysis, seems pretty reasonable. But what about when it comes to the specific issue of Brexit? Now, here much focus has been on Joe Biden's Irish-American heritage. And this became apparent from a fairly entertaining video which went viral this weekend. Actually, it occurred a few months ago, but has, for obvious reasons, been boosted now. It's Biden's response to the BBC asking him for comment on something.
Mr. Biden, a quick word for the BBC.
The BBC, I'm Irish.
The BBC, I'm Irish. There's some clips of Biden that make me, like him a lot more than, I would necessarily, according to, his role in past legislation. More seriously, though, than that clip, which was obviously clearly a joke, this was Biden's response to our Tory government using the internal market bill to override or to threaten to override the UK-EU withdrawal agreement. So back in earlier in the year, Biden tweeted, "We can't allow the Good Friday Agreement that brought peace to Northern Ireland to become a casualty of Brexit. Any trade deal between the US and UK must be contingent upon respect for the agreement and preventing the return of a hard border, period." So a Biden administration won't sign a UK-US trade deal unless Britain respects the Good Friday Agreement, doesn't override the withdrawal agreement, and commits to not having any kind of border on the island of Ireland. This is all incredibly relevant at the moment because currently the internal market bill, that's the bill which threatens to break the withdrawal agreement, is being debated in the House of Lords. It was passed in the House of Commons. It's going to go back to the House of Commons and the government are going to have to decide whether or not to stick with it. But again, will this internal market bill currently being debated in the Lords scupper any hopes of a US-UK trade deal? And will a Biden administration shift Boris Johnson and our Tory government's focus when it comes to negotiating a Brexit deal? Anand Menon again.
It's hard to know, isn't it, in the sense that what we don't know is whether the government was ever serious about the internal market bill. That's to say, there are some people who say this was simply a negotiating ploy. They were always going to remove the offending clauses simply because of the trouble that would have ensued had they maintained the right to breach an agreement they signed less than a year ago. There's no doubt that Biden in the White House adds an additional pressure in two ways. Firstly, because he is ferociously proud of his Irish roots, very committed to the Good Friday Agreement, and has made his feelings on the internal market bill clear. And secondly, I think in the sense that a no-deal Brexit becomes slightly more uncomfortable with Biden in the White House than it would be with Trump in the White House. And one of the things I think President Biden will insist upon going forward is that Europeans work together and collaborate. He'll have no time for silly spats across the channel, and those spats would only get worse with a no-deal outcome. So I think there's a slightly greater pressure on both sides to get a deal now.
That was Anand Menon, Director of UK in a Changing Europe and a Professor at King's College London. If you want to hear more from Anand on how a Biden presidency will affect the UK, again, you can see his column on the Novara Media website. There is loads of really good content actually on our website at the moment. So do make sure if you enjoy Tysky Sour that you check out all the articles which we are publishing every day on novaramedia.com. Ash, I want your thoughts on this. Do you agree with Anand that potentially sort of the extent to which Boris Johnson's past comments about Joe Biden won't really affect the relationship between the United States and the UK because it's basically grounded in more material interest than what anyone was offended about was written in The Sun 4 years ago?
Well, yeah, I am inclined to agree. I think that perhaps there won't be such joyous shows of friendship at state banquets and the like, just because the two figures are going to be much less simpatico. But it's not really going to fundamentally change the relationship between the two nations. What is more important is that Joe Biden in the White House does make a no-deal Brexit less likely. It does challenge some of the assumptions baked into what ERG hardliners had hoped for in terms of the geo-economic orientation of the United Kingdom after Brexit. And this will have a huge impact in terms of, our own economy going forward. But I don't think it's going to be on the basis of Boris Johnson's obnoxious racism. I think it's just going to be a bit of realpolitik between, America and her satellite states, i.e. the United Kingdom.
And I mean, especially, I was speaking to Anand for longer as well, and he actually agreed with my suggestion, which is that this trade deal doesn't really matter. The UK-US trade deal, so much ink is wasted writing about it, but it is fundamentally just a ploy by the Conservatives to say that we're global Britain and Brexit is a success. Mm-hmm. It's going to make very little difference to our GDP. There are currently already very low barriers of trade between... Tiny. There are already very low barriers of trade between the UK and the USA. So in terms of the presidency changing, probably won't make that much difference. It could make some difference in terms of rhetoric. So whilst Donald Trump was very willing to sort of back up the rhetoric of our Tory government sort of trying to play a hardline game with the European Union, which Boris Johnson, for some reason, thinks plays well with certain parts of his electorate. I don't think Biden is going to be willing to back them up on that particular theme.
Also, the thing to bear in mind is that Donald Trump in the White House provided a kind of, political and intellectual comfort and support indirectly to that kind of head-banging pro-Brexit, far-right aligned tendency within our own country. And I keep thinking here, it's a very invasive thought and it just pops up into my brain and stays there of, Darren Grimes's little bunny face with the Make America Great hat on, like Trump 2024. And in terms of that worldview, which said a lot about, ideas around race, culture, belonging, immigration, but also, geoeconomic positioning, Donald Trump really bolstered those figures. So I wonder what happens when you've got, hardcore Brexit headbangers all over talk radio, but you don't have those talking points being reinforced from the White House anymore. I kind of wonder what impact that might have on our media ecology. There is a a distinct difference between the political interest in the White House and the political interest in number 10 and, Johnson's cabinet. And I think that these things, that conflict and that divergence will have a kind of impact in terms of the people who are leading the national conversation on Brexit.
I mean, so in terms of the material relations between the two powers, obviously one much more powerful than the other. Yeah, I mean, me and Anand all inclined to think that it's probably going to be the material relations that prevail here. There was an interesting article in the Sunday Times, though, which put forward a different approach, a different suggestion, which was that personal animosity could actually severely affect Britain now that Biden is president. And it was based on a source from the Biden campaign talking to Tim Shipman, who is the political editor of the Sunday Times. So a quote from that source: "Biden's got a long memory and Boris is not in his good books. Biden and Obama are like family. Many of the people around Biden have been talking about Boris Johnson. The Kenyan remark has never gone away. They see Boris and Dominic Cummings like Trump and Bannon." And the source goes on to say, "Leaders who are not seen as allies on race, there will be big problems for those leaders." And then the article continues, "He doesn't want to work with people who project those views," the aide said, and he was shocked at the dismissiveness of black rights after Dominic Raab, the foreign secretary, called Black Lives Matter protesters taking the knee a symbol of subjugation and subordination, and said that he would kneel only before the Queen or when proposing to his wife. I think there's a couple of things that are very interesting about this, and one is how reactionary what is seen as standard discourse on race in this country can seem to moderates in the United States. So I think our government would like to think of themselves not really as Trumpians, but as from a similar sort of moderate, small c conservative tradition as Joe Biden. But what this is showing is those kind of statements from Dominic Raab, they would not be welcome outside of the Trumpian far-right Republican tendency in the United States. These are not moderate views which Dominic Raab is putting forward. At the same time, I'm kind of skeptical at the idea that Joe Biden would significantly change policy because someone has or has not said racist things in the past. Because this is someone who famously, and it did him some damage in the primaries, was willing to work with segregationists. He's someone who, in his presidential campaign, has been talking about his willingness, about how the strength of his candidacy is the fact that he is willing to work with Republicans who are, steeped in white supremacy and racism. So I think this might be, and this is an impression I get actually, that lots of the people who worked around Obama and worked and are now working around Biden are somewhat sort of enamored with the vision of politics which comes from programs like The West Wing, where they think that this is all about interpersonal relationships and sort of like these liberal dilemmas that are taking place. And I think this might just be someone running his mouth without that much influence on what policy happens. But I mean, still an interesting insight in how British rhetoric is interpreted by sort of centrists in the United States. Ash, I want your thoughts on that. Are you as dismissive as me about sort of this aide's prognosis about the US-UK relationship? What do you make of it?
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be all that important at all. But you know what? I do like seeing Dominic Raab sweat on Sophie Ridge and the Sunday politics shows, and to have these kinds of quotes being put to him, as foreign secretary, and being asked, look, has you being an obnoxious bonehead royally screwed up the special relationship? That's telly I like to watch. That is good quality Sunday morning TV. I just don't think that it's going to have much of an impact in the long run.
Yeah, that's such. It is an awkward question to be asked because the honest answer is, look, I don't think my being an obnoxious bonehead is going to really change the material relationships between the United States and the United Kingdom, because that's not how politics work. You have to somehow sort of get around the fact that you were clearly an obnoxious bonehead in the past.
You have to sort of stumble around and go, I clearly congratulate Joe Biden and his ethnically diverse Vice President Kamala Harris. Kamala, is that her name? You know what I mean? Like you get those moments of, where the robot is glitching in front of your very eyes, and there's little sparks and steams coming out of the ears. But no, I don't think it matters all that much, because you know what? If racial politics really mattered to Joe Biden, I mean, he wouldn't be able to work with Justin Trudeau, for instance, blackface Trudeau. It would cut off friendly relations with most world leaders. If you're saying, we take racism so seriously, that how you treat ethnic minorities and how you yourself have behaved in the personal context means that, we're not going to work with you as closely. There would literally be no relationship, diplomatic or otherwise, between the states of America and Australia if being racist and obnoxious disqualified you from diplomatic relations. So yeah, I just think the racism is too ubiquitous to present too much of a problem to the functioning of the American state on the international stage. Is that depressing? Probably.
A little bit. I'm just distracted because we've got 2 donations from Dan Under. We've got Damien Imagy with $10 Australian. I've never been able to watch live due to time difference. Shout out to my mate Nikki. Not a birthday or anything, but I know they'll be watching later. Keep up the good work. Love from Australia. Love from the UK. And happy birthday to Nikki. And we've also got, I don't know if it's a coincidence, we've got $31 Australian from Pippa Tandy. I don't know what time it is in Australia or why we've got so many Australians watching this evening, but it's always a pleasure to know that we have viewers around the world. And Baz Cams with a $5. Tories are out of their depth now. They've been out of their depth for a while. Although, and we're not going to make any complaints, I mean, the vaccine is going to come and save us all and probably, save Boris Johnson to some degree. Even if that happens, it's worth it. Quite frankly, I don't care if the vaccine makes life easier for Boris Johnson because I'm just desperate to go to the pub by spring. Ash Sarkar, it has been a pleasure, as always, to be joined by you on a Monday evening. I understand that while we were live, you got a shout out on Nigella's show from Nigella Lawson.
I did. So a while ago, I tweeted one of my favorite childhood recipes, which is fish finger borta, which is a kind of mashed up fish finger with mustard and green chili and all sorts of good stuff. And Nigella then did a version of the recipe and she published it in her new cookbook. And then today was the first episode of her cookery show, which goes along with the book, which is called Cook, Eat, Repeat. And it was the first recipe that she did.
Wow. So it wasn't just she cooked. Nigella Lawson cooked a recipe of yours on TV today.
Well, yeah, she amended it. So one of her additions, which is really, really gorgeous, is pickled red onion. And I was always a pickle skeptic until I tried the recipe with red onion, and I loved it. So I feel really chuffed. And one of the reasons why I feel so happy is that this dish, fish finger borta, it was the dish that my mum would make when she was really low on money and really low on time. So this is when she was a working single parent, and you imagine the pressure of having to feed 2 kids day in, day out, and you're on a shoestring. And so that was one of the things that she would cook. So it's got this tremendous nostalgic value for me. It reminds me of being a kid, and she would just make huge amounts of it because you could eat it cold. And so just me having these, endless bowls of fish finger borta while watching, I think I was a big fan of Ed, and Eddie. So yeah, it has this wonderful association for me. And see it brought to a wider audience by Nigella Lawson is kind of surreal and funny and great and really great.
Trump's out. We have a coronavirus vaccine, and Ash's recipes are appearing on Nigella Lawson's cookery programs. We're all in a good mood today. I hope you are too. I hope you've enjoyed this show, which was longer than usual. That means it's a bit more work for Fox and myself. Let's have some Fox emojis in the comments section. If you've enjoyed it, if you want longer shows, do hit like. And yeah, we really want to increase capacity so we can keep making more regular quality shows, more different types of shows. If you are already a regular donor, thank you so much. You make this possible. If not, please do go to novaramedia.com/support and donate the equivalent of 1 hour's wage a month. Hit the like because it's good for the algorithm. We've got 973 now. We've got more than 2,000 watching. We've had more than 2,000, about 2,500 for 2 hours. Very good. It means the world to us. For now, I've been Michael Walker with Ash Sarkar. You've been watching Tysky Sour on Novara Media. Good night.